This is going to be one of my videos in my extended Bible series, where I delve into the Bible in detail, looking at each section and breaking down the prophecies, the visions, the stories and the accounts with what we know historically and what science has discovered for us, as well as what the Bible itself tells us. If this is the sort of video you're interested in, please like and share it with your friends. The more discussion we have, the better. Any thoughts you have, please leave in the comments. And if you're that sort of person who likes to stay up to date with things, please consider subscribing to the channel. Apart from that, I hope you enjoyed the video.
Whilst the sons of Abraham weren't as infamous as their father, they were still important figures in their own right. The sons of Isaac, however, make for an interesting study. Esau and Jacob have an uneasy relationship, to say the least, and some might even say it suggests something of a darker side of God's intent. This is not a story I've heard covered in any study I've been to, so I feel almost obliged to cover it here in this video. But in particular, I'll be asking these questions. Why did Jacob trick Esau and Isaac? Why did the Lord allow it? And what would have happened if Esau had been blessed? To set the premise, this story is detailed and straightforward enough to be an account with maybe a few hearsay stories thrown in to broaden the knowledge base. However, by the same token, it's quite likely going to be an oral story due to the gaps in the tale being glossed over. Since Abraham had so much told about him, writing would have been very well established in those times. And also bearing in mind Isaac would not only have had power and money, but favour with God, he would most likely have had his own scribes to make his letters and write his chronicles. And it's only possible that bards were looking for any information about him that they could, so they could sing songs about him. He was a very important person at the time, and therefore needed a song about him. In short, quite possibly a recorded ballad or a transcribed story, but really, I don't know. At this point in the Bible, it's much hard to say, and accounts and ballads start to blend together, so Lord only knows what the exact source is. Possibly a mixture of both, but still, that just adds more intrigue to this tale, which we will delve into now. To start off with, we must remember that we got an idea of the dynamic between the two brothers when they were still in the womb. Isaac's wife, Rebekah, conceived the twins thanks to God's intercession at Isaac's request, Rebekah being barren at the time. She could feel them battling inside her womb and was concerned, so she called out to the Lord for guidance. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb. 2 peoples shall be separate from your body. One shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." Since other nations were at war with each other at the time, even those who were related to each other, like the Ishmaelites, one could say it was almost inevitable the two brothers are going to be fighting at some point, or was just sibling rivalry going completely mad, and they were getting started at an early stage. Very early, in fact. Still fetal. But the phrasing is interesting here. Almost a prophecy, if you will. One shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. No further reference is given in this verse, but we can presume the older is naturally going to be stronger. Therefore, it is likely an early reference to the weak leading the strong. To put this in modern terms, so we can all understand, those that can, do, those that can't, end up running the show. You may be experiencing that for the first time, but it is a pretty ironic statement. Later on, we get the birth of the boys. The first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over, so they called him Esau. Footnotes suggest the name means hairy, which is a bit harsh for a child who can't help that. But my own independent translation of the Hebrew says it meant made, ran, or gave, or even have done. I originally thought that the term hairy would suggest he was the stronger by making him seem like a hairy bear, bears being a symbol of strength, not only in those times, but later on in the medieval period. However, whilst it's certainly not the case in this instance, I think it implies something different about the relationship between him and his brother Jacob. Many of the context words given imply that run, or the gave, is in relation to tests, and the overall translation lines up with that thinking, suggesting that he is to be tested in some way. Afterward, his brother came out. His hand took a hold of Esau's heel, so his name was Jacob. Again, footnotes differ from direct modern translations. The footnotes suggest it literally means one who takes the heel, suggesting it means supplanter or deceitful, possibly a connection to the serpent which strikes the heel and therefore is deceitful. My translation suggests it's closer to the Hebrew lakov, which means to follow, track, or observe, and the verb lekev, meaning heel, as in the heel of the foot. Rather annoyingly, the name Jacob isn't given a straight translation, so I don't know for certain. But it's interesting, firstly because he followed his brother out of the womb and showed that he was the younger of the two. Second, because he grabbed his brother's heel, it suggests he was the weaker and could only reach that part of him. There's way more to this than I first thought, and certainly gives us a lot to build on for later. As most brothers do, they grew up to be completely different men. Esau was a great hunter of great skill, whilst Jacob was quieter, generally remaining in the tents, and, it suggested, learned from the women of the tribe, though one translation does say he was a shepherd. The text strongly suggests favoritism from both parents. Isaac or Esau, because he preferred raw game meat from the fields, whilst Rebekah preferred Jacob. This comes into play later on, but I'll suggest this implies shifting of gender roles, even in those days. Granted, nowhere near as profound as more recent times with common gender stereotypes, but he turned upside down. The fact Isaac favoured a son who worked outdoors as a hunter and provider of the household, whilst Rebecca had love for a son who stayed at home to learn from the women. And if we also bear in mind the ultimate way this all works out, this puts a dent in the reasoning many people have that gender roles are fixed in stone by God's will. Clearly not. And in fact, the skills that Jacob picked up came in handy, as one day, as is clearly mentioned, he made a nice lentil stew, was brewing in his tent, when his brother Esau came in, worn out, presumably from an unsuccessful hunting trip. Esau said to Jacob, "Please give me some of that red stew, for I am weary." But Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright as of this day." Now, surely it's blackmail. Your birthright for a bowl of soup. Some might say this is where Jacob's deceitful name comes to the surface. But I don't think so, because it's not very good at hiding it. It's a straightforward trade. Give me your birthright, and I'll feed you. Not a very good trade, but it's a plain simple one, and anyone can see through it. It's quite possibly lost on Esau, though, for at the time, he only complained once about starving, and so having a birthright wouldn't make any difference, and quite easily swore over his birthright. He got fed and went on his way. The phrasing, however, is interesting, for the text says he despised his birthright. Other translations have it as show contempt, have little thought, or even slighted. The word weibes is only used one other time, where it meant scorn or disdain. This implies Esau was a man who took neither his rights as the firstborn or his responsibilities as the future patriarch seriously. This may well explain what happened later in the story. Sometime later, we can presume several years and at least one chapter in the book, Isaac, now old and blind, called Esau to him and asked him to go catch some game and make his favourite meal to bring before him, so he could eat and then bless his son before he dies, as he didn't know when he was going to pass. To be honest, it's unclear why he sets that task, since he knew Esau was there, and more often people find it easier to make blessings of that kind after fasting and praying, certainly in later traditions. It could be that his hunger made it hard to concentrate, finding it hard to find the right words, and so forth. I know that feeling all too well. Or that he preferred to have the good taste of food in his mouth before he passed away, as he had no idea when he would pass. Now his wife Rebecca heard all this, and ordered Jacob to go to the flock and take a pair of fine young goats to prepare Isaac's favourite meal, so that he could take it to his father and receive the blessing in his brother's stead. Deceitful again, sounds. But I think there's more to this than meets the eye, and in this case I mean that quite literally. Because whilst I use the term blind in the opening paragraph of this section, the text says, his eyes were so dim he could not see. Whilst I tried taking the full sentence and translating it, it doesn't translate back very well. But interesting enough, the Hebrew meriat turns up meaning looking, see, or to behold in later books, most notably Isaiah, and directly translates as mirror. This suggests that the sight Isaac has lost isn't just his mortal physical sight that sees the world around him, but his spiritual sight that shows him what is actually there, shows him the soul of the person. It could be this is what makes Jacob's and Rebekah's ruse work. It's worthwhile noting that Jacob points out the flaws in his brother's plan by mentioning his lack of hair compared to his brother, who was like a hairy bear. This only prompts the makeshift beard and gloves of goat skin to be made, and him to be dressed in fine clothes that belonged to his brother. Despite all this, Isaac was still suspicious. But Isaac said, "How is it that you found it so quickly, my son?" And Jacob said, "Because the Lord your God brought it to me." Isaac was still unsure, and checked that it was Esau by checking his hands. He was duly fooled by the goat skin. He then ate his fill and blessed his son, endorsing him to be the new patriarch after him, and giving him blessings from those that bless him, and cursing those that curse him. All this was done not a moment too soon, because Esau was just returning at that moment with the game he had prepared for his father. After a moment's great confusion, as they both tried to work out what had happened, they realized Jacob had tricked them and had taken Esau's blessing. Both were in shock. It didn't sit well with either of them, but whilst Isaac made the most of it and made a blessing for Esau of the sort, it was clear that neither was content with the idea, and Esau indeed swore revenge on his brother. Much more is to be said for their story, but I don't think I have time for it here in this story. So I'm going to start to wrap it up and look back at the questions. Why did Jacob trick Isaac and Esau? One thing seems to suggest that the brothers weren't in the typical, and if a girl can do it, I can do better relationships that many siblings have. Certainly my brothers were like that. They not only had different skills, but having the same goal of leading the tribe after their father dies. It could be that Jacob, as part of his name, was watching and understanding his brother, tracking him, learning his ways, and saw that he lacked the qualities of a good and godly patriarch for the house of Israel. He felt he could do a better job. Don't we all when we see someone struggling or showing they're not really good for the job? This prompted him to first entice Esau to surrender his birthright, and later on to go along with his mother's plan to be blessed by Isaac instead of his brother. Why did the Lord allow it? Philip likes to mention that a friend of mine once raised the God-devil paradox of two people praying for the other to be defeated whilst they succeeded. This is an interesting question, and one I definitely want to cover in a later video. But the principle applies here with this question. The fact that it almost asks God to pick a side when we are all his favourites. In this case, I actually believe that God also thought Jacob could do a better job at being patriarch than Esau. Looking at the way his brother reacted to being given first the choice of either having no food or no inheritance, and later, when his blessing was stolen, I can see that he doesn't act in the way that suggests he is a very good person to lead a great family onwards. Practically giving away his soul for a tasty meal and vowing vengeance on his brother are not signs of someone who will be a good example to the Israelites. I mean, how often would we want that person leading our children through their lives? Someone who is willing to give up pretty much everything they own just for a simple bite to eat, or someone that just vows vengeance on anyone who wrongs him, no matter how simple the ruse. What would have happened if Esau had been blessed? Now, to answer this, I first have to bring up something that was said in the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. Aslan, the Jesus allegory, said on 2 occasions, "No one is ever told what would have happened." This implies that multiple futures could have happened, and therefore it's worthwhile remembering God as a broader perspective on the universe. We do. And just because something could have happened doesn't necessarily mean we have any right to know about it. But for the sake of argument, if we had to hypothesize what would have happened if Esau had been blessed, I think we just need to look at what happened in later chapters. I'll be giving it rather short shift at the moment. Esau had gathered a large force to find Jacob and his clan, and were marching to meet him with drawn swords. He was told he would live by the sword, probably he was a sellsword or a warlord. Like I said, I will elaborate on this section later in my studies, but I think it heavily implies that if he was made patriarch, he would be far more warlike than his brother. Whilst this trait starts to crop up in later generations of Adam's main descendants, especially when the kingdom of Israel was being established, at this stage in history it becomes unnecessary, and the more avoidance-based tactics of Jacob are more likely to allow the house to survive. Again, this is another hypothesis, but I think if the house of Esau was to enter Egypt and be enslaved, they would be more inclined to rise up, but they would do it in a rebellious manner and try to fight the Pharaoh, rather than just flee. That would most likely result in their downfall, hence wiping out the line of Abraham and certainly the line of Isaac before they ever left Egypt and reached the lands that would become Israel. It's a sobering thought. Just one quirk of history could change the whole course of history. So to sum up, there's more to this story than can be easily covered in one video. But the gist of it is that regardless of one's birthright by custom, if you're not suited for the role and someone else is not only willing but capable of taking your place, God will allow it, regardless of how much we may think we deserve it or are entitled to it. He, and through him Jesus, have given us quite the gift in opening heaven's gates for us all. But we must remember, if we don't want to take it, and thus the responsibilities of the role, we therefore have no more right to enter heaven than those who follow the devil himself. I think this proves it's not who you are that matters. I don't think God cares about that at all. It's what we do when the chips are down. As a wise Englishman once said, people are like tea bags. You only know how strong they are when they're in hot water.
Hope you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Like, share and subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching, and God bless.